That wet puck of coffee grounds looks harmless. You tap it out of the filter, shake it over the bed, and it disappears into the dark soil. That is the trap. Coffee grounds can help a garden, but when they land as a wet layer on top of the soil, the same material that looked useful can turn into a mat, a sour patch, or a crust that water has to fight through. The promise here is simple. Use coffee grounds in a way the soil can actually accept. Most gardeners do not throw coffee grounds on the garden because they are careless. They do it because the idea makes sense at first. The grounds are dark. They smell earthy. They came from a plant. They look like something that should belong in soil. And compared with buying another bag, bottle, booster, or fertilizer, coffee grounds feel like the kind of cheap backyard trick older gardeners would have used without making a big speech about it. There is truth in that instinct. Coffee grounds can be useful in compost. They can add organic material. They can help balance a pile that has too many dry leaves. They can become part of a richer, more active mix over time. But the strange part is this. The benefit usually comes after they are blended, broken up, and decomposed into the system. The mistake is treating coffee grounds like a finished soil amendment the moment they leave the kitchen. That is where many gardens get into trouble. A spoonful scattered into compost is one thing. A wet clump dumped onto a bed is another. A thin trace mixed into a large volume of soil is one thing. A black blanket around a tomato stem is another. The same material can behave very differently depending on whether it is mixed, diluted, and aerated, or whether it sits in one dense patch. Coffee grounds are not magic fertilizer. They are an ingredient, and ingredients need a recipe. Once you see it that way, the whole coffee ground habit changes. Think about what used grounds are like when they come out of the filter. They are fine, wet, and packed together. If you squeeze them in your hand, they do not behave like loose compost. They can smear. They can clump. They can hold their shape. That texture matters more than the color. So when a gardener dumps a wet puck directly onto the soil and leaves it there, the grounds do not always melt into the bed. They may sit as a separate layer. After a few waterings, that layer can flatten. After a few hot afternoons, the surface can dry into a crust. Then the gardener looks at the bed and sees dark organic material on top, but underneath, the soil may not be breathing or drinking evenly. That sounds like a fertilizer problem, but it usually starts as a structure problem. Fine particles packed together can reduce the tiny air spaces that soil life and roots depend on. Water may run across the surface instead of moving down cleanly, or the top may stay wet and sticky while the soil below remains less changed than the gardener expects. The bed looks richer, but the richness is sitting in the wrong form. This is where most gardeners get misled. They see mold and panic. They see no instant growth and add more. They see the grounds dry out and assume the bed needs extra water. Then a helpful kitchen scrap becomes one more thing the soil has to deal with. A small amount of pale, fuzzy growth on decomposing organic matter is not automatically a disaster. In a compost pile, fungal growth can be part of normal breakdown. But if the grounds smell sour, turn slimy, attract nuisance flies, or form a heavy wet pad, the message is different. That is not a coffee miracle happening. That is a material sitting too wet, too dense, or too isolated from the rest of the system. The fix is not to throw coffee grounds away. The fix is to stop treating them like a topping. Coffee grounds work best when they enter a process, and the easiest process for a home gardener is the compost bin. The next time you empty a coffee filter, do not walk straight to the garden bed. Walk to the compost first. Break the grounds apart so they are not sitting as one wet puck. Then mix them with dry material. Shredded leaves, dry grass, torn cardboard, straw, wood shavings in small amounts, or shredded paper can all help create space around the grounds. The key is not a perfect laboratory ratio. The key is texture. If a handful of the mix feels like damp cake batter, it needs more dry material. If it smells sour or looks shiny and packed, it needs more air and more browns. If you can still see separate coffee clumps after turning the pile, they need to be broken up. A practical backyard rule is this: For every handful of wet coffee grounds, add several handfuls of loose dry material and mix until the grounds disappear into the pile, instead of forming black pockets. That one move changes everything. The dry material opens the mix. The coffee grounds become part of a larger carbon and nitrogen meal instead of a dense layer. Moisture spreads through the pile instead of collecting in one spot. Air can move. Microbes have a better working environment. Over time, the grounds lose their identity. They stop being coffee waste and become compost. That is the moment when they are much safer and more useful for the garden. Not because they became magical, but because they entered the system in the right order. This also explains why some gardeners swear by coffee grounds and others say they caused problems. Both may be telling the truth. The gardener who mixed a small amount into a big compost pile may have helped the system. The gardener who poured a week's worth around a pepper plant may have made a wet crust. Same material, different recipe, and that is the part most people miss. The question is not, are coffee grounds good or bad? The better question is, where are they going? How much is going there? And what are they mixed with? If you already have a compost bin, the safest routine is simple. Empty the filter into the bin. Break up the clump. Add dry browns right away. Turn or stir that section so the grounds are not sitting in one dark pocket. If the pile is already wet, wait or add extra dry material. If the pile is dry and full of leaves, coffee grounds may help bring moisture and nitrogen into the mix. The compost pile will tell you what it needs. If it smells earthy and feels like a wrung-out sponge, you are close. If it smells rotten, sour, or swampy, it is too wet or too compacted. If it is dusty and nothing seems to break down, it may need moisture and a small amount of greener material. Coffee grounds can play a role there, but they should not dominate the pile. A compost bin is not a trash can with leaves in it. It is a mixing bowl with air. That is why the recipe matters. Now, what if you do not have a compost bin? Or what if you only have a small raised bed and you still want to use the grounds? Then the rule becomes stricter. Use less than you think, and never leave a thick layer on the surface. A light dusting is the limit. Not a black carpet. Not a ring around the stem. Not a wet pile in one corner. You should still be able to see soil through it. Scratch it into the top inch of soil or blend it into finished compost before spreading. Then cover the area lightly with leaves, mulch, or compost so the grounds are not exposed as a drying crust. If you are working around plants that are already growing, keep coffee grounds away from the crown and stem. Do not pack them around young seedlings. Do not pile them against lettuce, basil, peppers, tomatoes, or any plant that already looks stressed. Place any mixed material farther out, where feeder roots can eventually reach it, and keep the surface loose. If the bed is newly planted with small seeds, skip direct coffee grounds altogether. Tiny seedlings do not need a dense experimental layer above them. Let the grounds compost first. That one restraint can save a lot of frustration. There is another myth worth clearing up. Coffee grounds are often talked about as if they are simply acid for acid-loving plants. That is too simple. Used coffee grounds are not a reliable way to control soil pH in a predictable backyard way. If you are trying to change pH for blueberries or other specific crops, use a soil test and the correct amendment. Do not try to steer pH by guessing with breakfast waste. Coffee grounds should not be your pH plan. They should be part of your organic matter plan. There is also a pet warning that matters in real backyards. If you have dogs that dig in beds or eat strange things, be cautious about scattering coffee grounds where they can reach them. Used grounds may still contain residues you do not want pets eating. In that situation, the compost bin is the better place, especially if it is covered or managed. The garden is not separate from the household. The method has to fit the yard you actually have. Here is the simple test before coffee grounds ever touch your soil. Pick up a small handful after they cool. If they stay in a wet lump, do not apply them directly. Mix them first. If they smear like paste, mix them first. If they smell sour, mix them with dry browns and air them out in compost. If they are loose, dry, and already blended into finished compost, they are much easier for the bed to accept. Then test the spot after watering. If water beads, runs around the area, or leaves the coffee patch sitting like a dark skin on top, that layer is too thick. Break it up. Rake it away if needed. Mix it with dry compost or leaves. Do not solve a crust by adding another layer of grounds. That is the coffee trap. The gardener sees a problem caused by concentration, then adds more of the same concentrated material. A healthier sign is different. You should not see coffee as a separate black patch. You should see it disappear into a varied mix. The texture should still crumble. Water should move through. The soil surface should not feel sealed. The smell should stay earthy, not sour. The more invisible the coffee grounds become in the mix, the better they are usually being used. That sentence is worth keeping. If the coffee still looks like coffee in the garden bed, it may not be ready to act like soil. Now imagine two gardeners with the same morning routine. The first one empties the filter onto the bed every day. A little here, a little there, always near the plants that look hungry. After a few weeks, certain spots look dark, but they crust. The surface gets patchy. Some areas stay wet too long. Others shed water. The gardener keeps thinking, maybe the plants need more. The second gardener empties the same filter into compost, breaks the puck apart, adds dry leaves, and turns it in. Weeks later, that material returns to the bed as part of something larger. Not as coffee. Not as a black topping. As compost with structure, balance, and air. The difference was not the waste. The difference was the recipe. That is why coffee grounds are such a good test of how a gardener sees soil. If you see soil as a place to dump helpful things, coffee grounds become tempting. If you see soil as a living system with texture, air, moisture, and timing, coffee grounds become an ingredient that needs a path. The cheap material is not the secret. The process is. And the signs in the bed start to make more sense. If you see a black crust on top, think layer, not fertilizer. If you see a sour smell, think too wet and too dense, not more nutrients. If you see fuzzy growth on a small patch, think decomposition. Then check whether the material is loose, aired, and mixed. If plants do not respond after repeated coffee applications, stop adding and look at structure, watering, compost maturity, and the actual needs of the crop. Coffee grounds cannot fix compacted soil by themselves. They cannot replace a balanced compost system. They cannot rescue a bed that needs drainage, mulch, minerals, or better watering habits. And they should not be treated as a daily feeding program. But used wisely, they can have a place. They can feed the compost process. They can add organic material in small amounts. They can help a dry, carbon-heavy pile wake up when mixed well. They can become part of the dark, crumbly material that makes a bed easier to manage. The shift is simple. Do not ask, can I put coffee grounds in my garden? Ask, can my soil handle them in the form I am about to give them? That question will stop most mistakes before they happen. If the grounds are wet and clumped, they belong in compost with dry material. If they are already blended into finished compost, they can go to the bed. If you are applying directly, use only a faint dusting, scratch it in, keep it away from stems, and watch how water moves afterward. If the surface seals, you use too much. If the smell turns sour, the mix needs air. If pets dig, keep the grounds contained. That is a recipe a backyard gardener can actually use. The next time you hold a used coffee filter over the garden, pause for 1 second. That dark puck is not a miracle. It is not trash either. It is an ingredient waiting for the right place. Put it straight on the soil in a wet clump, and it can become the coffee trap. Break it up, mix it with dry browns, let the compost system work, and it becomes something the soil can receive. Coffee grounds are not magic fertilizer. They are an ingredient, and ingredients need a recipe.